Well, well, well. I should have known I'd be asked to speak this evening on such short notice. But I resent being called a suspect because I'm a full-fledged member. I am, Um, but I guess with less time than my sponsor, the sponsee, myself, uh, is as good a suspect as any. But it's very interesting because when I started to think about the term suspect, I started to think about when I actually identified as an alcoholic. Um, and, it's interesting because when you're an alcoholic, admittedly so, uh, there's a lot of digging. You're going back in time, back in time. When did all this start? What influenced me to behave this way? What are my characteristics and why are they there? And I started to identify um, a lot of different, I wouldn't call them episodes, but, celebrations, shall we call them. Times that I started to use and drink before I thought they previously existed. So, for example, I kind of set my drinking start date at around 2000. The time I became what I thought was an alcoholic, not a normie, uh, an actual habitual user. And today, as I started thinking about what a suspect was, I identified a lot of times that before that would characterize me as an alcoholic. And it's interesting because so much of that time was forgotten or pushed under the carpet, if you will. Oh no, it was just the second day in the weekend when I wanted to have more than 5 martinis. Um, it was just a Thursday night, and Thursday led to Friday, and everything was fine. I was high functioning, had a good job, and everything like that. And so, thank you for that, because actually, when you said the word suspect, I started to go back, and it wasn't 2000. It was, like probably 1989 or something like that. Uh, and then I started to think about what brought me there and what brought me here. So, what brought me there, I can proudly identify as my life circumstances, my parents, my friends, but they weren't at fault for making me an alcoholic. It's the behavior that I chose. There were a lot of opportunities to drink or not drink. And not just drink or use, but drink or use in a way that was reoccurring and not just reoccurring, but um, behavior altering in such a way that um, I used it to soften the effects of a stressful work week or month or day. And I didn't really realize that until I started to think about it. And I've certainly considered it before, but until today it was very interesting. Uh, Suddenly those memories were there like flash. Um, and it really has a lot to do, in my case, um, with not just all the influences around me, but what was already inside of me as the opportunity to become an alcoholic. And it was all there. Um, and I made the choice to engage in that. I think the real message for me was that um, I think that, I think about it today as it affects my life. The real message for me was, well, I had a choice. I had a choice to either drink or not drink. And I don't mean casually or as a normie, but as someone who chose to take a certain path. Okay, I'm going to let that guide me into my next behavior. I'm going to let that smooth over this really bad week or month at work. I'm going to let that cushion the blow of this relationship that did not work out well for me, or make an excuse to use alcohol and, well, it was alcohol, um, to make the other person wrong or make the other party wrong. And my sponsor, Dan, and I often joke about the, um, the time that Dan was actually wrong, you know. But it was a mistake because we thought he was wrong, but he really wasn't. So, you know, and there was a lot of that going on in my life too. So, um, uh, in any case, as a suspect, I think that's a great term because it's a guessing game. But it really starts with blaming others. It starts with making excuses. It starts with kind of like a secondary life, you know, where you say, well, that isn't me and I didn't do that. And, you know, I'm fine. I'm drinking. Well, look, I got a job. I've got a paycheck. I've got, you know, a relationship. I've got all these things, and putting all of those things in place as circumstances that define me as a non-alcoholic. But those things have nothing to do with it. You can be super successful, or you can be groveling on the cement and hiding in a tent. It really doesn't matter. Alcoholism, as we choose to have it affect our lives, is so very different than all the other things going on in our lives. And I think I've come to really recognize that for myself. And that's what acceptance is for me. And that's what control is for me. And a lot of the other things that we discover about ourselves through this program, willingly, maybe sometimes not so willingly at first. So, it's been a real gift. I would just like to say this because my parents and most of my siblings have passed. But what's important to me is I've gotten to a place where I don't blame the parents. I don't blame mom for her alcoholism affecting my life and making it worse. I don't blame dad for whatever his behavior was that raised me as a child. I had choices all along the way. And it's okay, if one recognizes that as I grew up, uh, I chose to feel either, um, that this wasn't my fault, or it was the way I was raised, or it was the way I was schooled. Um, it's really great because ultimately, what the opportunity AA brought to me was a circumstance where I got to recognize what my relationship was with my parents and my siblings and friends and so forth that I used to like to blame. And it was a gift because I got to release I got to release them from blame and understand who I was as a person, accepting my own behavior and the choices that I had made. And I often, I pray to my parents all the time and I talk to them. And it's such a wonderful gift to have come to the point where I understand what the circumstances were. I understand what their behavior was. I understand what my behavior was. And that's what's so. That exists. But nevertheless, even though I was the younger one or I was the child, those were choices I made as I moved through my life and grew up. And it's through that kind of understanding that I got through what I've learned in this program that has not just allowed me to move on, through forgiveness and understanding regrets and resentments and so forth. But understanding and accepting the true love and the relationships that existed between myself and my parents and my siblings and my friends that I previously blamed, and releasing all of that, because ultimately, whatever we're all doing in our own little worlds, um, those are our lives and those are their lives. But I get to make my choices in my own life without saying, well, look at what their life is, it screwed me up. It's not like that, it's recognizing that others have their own lives and their own experiences. And I've come to realize, oh yeah, that's their mission, that's their mission, that's her mission, this is my mission. And I don't have to make them, somebody who's passed away, I don't have to make them the steward of the life that I lead today. The life that I lead today is my own choice. And even when I was relying on them, it was still my own choice. I could have always made other choices. And accepting that is such a gift because it allows me to move on. So I ain't no damn suspect, Dan. I'm the real deal. So thank you very much. Thank you.